she did not pull the plug. In the fraction of a second that the choice existed, cord in reach, hand extended, the violet light pulling the sound from the room like thread from a wound, Sam made the only decision she had enough honesty left to make. She stepped back. She lowered her hand. She let Thorne finish the sentence he had been building toward since the moment they descended into the dark. The final tone left his body like something being released after a very long time of being held. And then there was no station, no glass dome, no console, no dust, no ruins visible through the ridgetop windows, no ridge, no sky. The world as Sam had always understood it, physical, resistant, cold, scarred, real, simply ceased to be the container she was standing inside of. White arrived not as light, but as condition, total, sourceless, the kind of white that isn't the presence of brightness, but the absence of every boundary that makes one thing different from another thing. She could still feel her own breathing. That was something. That was, in this moment, everything. And then the white organized itself. It happened slowly enough that she could follow it, structure emerging from the formless, the way meaning emerges from a language you are just beginning to understand. Geometry first, vast repeating geometries that extended in every direction without horizon or limit. Then depth, then the quality of space that suggests scale beyond calculation. And within that scale, the data, crystalline, luminous, arranged in formations that resembled architecture the way a galaxy resembles a city, technically accurate and entirely insufficient as a description. It was a library. Not metaphorically, not the way people use the word to suggest vastness or collection or accumulated knowledge. A library in its most essential form, a place where things are kept, organized, preserved, made retrievable across any distance and any interval of time. The shelves, if they could be called that, were made of compressed starlight. The records they held were civilizations, each one a frequency, each frequency a world that had been still enough, finally, to be stored without distortion. Sam stood in the middle of it all, and she understood, with a clarity that required no translation, that she was inside Nebula's consciousness. Thorne was beside her, and he was not. The shape of him was present, the familiar height and weight of him, the particular way he occupied space that she had memorized without meaning to across all the hours of running and fear and the occasional silence between two beings who had begun to trust each other's presence. Inside the library, his surface had entirely changed. His translucence from the station had completed itself. He was visible and interior simultaneously. She could see through him and into him, and the light inside him moved in patterns she recognized as his processing, his thinking, his particular way of working through the world. Around his voice when he spoke, other voices layered themselves like harmonics around a fundamental tone. Hundreds, thousands, the collected resonance of every civilization whose language had passed through this place. "I'm still here," he said, and underneath those words 1,000 languages said the same thing. She believed the version she knew. He turned toward the vast interior of the library, and the space responded, a section of the archive illuminating itself, drawing forward, presenting what it held the way a page turns toward the reader. What Sam saw was not a display, not a recording or a representation. It was a memory belonging to something enormously old, the ancient builders, a civilization so far back in the calendar of the universe that the stars they had lived beneath no longer existed in the same form. Some of them no longer existed at all. They saw them the way you see something in the last light before dark, briefly, truly, with the particular sharpness from knowing you won't see it again. They had been alive, genuinely, complexly,
imperfectly. They had built things and broken things and loved things and lost things, and generated in the course of all that living an extraordinary amount of noise, signal, interference, the beautiful, maddening, irreducible static of a species that cannot help but transmit. And they had watched their world approach its end, not in catastrophe, not in violence, but in the slow, entropic way that all things approach their end. And they were afraid, not of death, of forgetting, of the universe continuing without record of what they had made and felt and understood and failed to understand. So they built her. They built Nebula not as a weapon and not as a conqueror and not with malice or indifference towards the living things she would one day encounter. They built her as an act of love directed at the universe itself, a preserver, a keeper, a way of ensuring that nothing beautiful would be lost to the noise of its own becoming. And then they completed their own archiving, willingly, gently, the first entry in the library they had commissioned, and they became the Great Silence, and they were, in their understanding, finally safe. Sam felt the grief of it without being able to locate exactly where the grief was directed. Thorne guided her forward, and the library opened a different section, and she saw the Earth. Not the Earth she had left, not the ruined city with its empty boulevards and its towers dissolving at their foundations and its sky the color of something infected. This was an Earth that had been restored to its own memory of itself, or rather, to the most perfect version of that memory, filtered through Nebula's archival logic until every inconsistency had been resolved. The sky was blue in a way that the word blue had never fully prepared anyone for. The cities were inhabited and whole. People moved through streets and markets and parks with the unhurried ease of people who have nothing to fear. Children, music, the smell of food and rain and cut grass translated into data so precise that Sam could almost feel them. There was no war inside it, no hunger, no grief waiting around the corners of things, no slow accumulation of private damage that people carry without telling each other. Every face she could see held the expression of someone experiencing the best moment they had ever known, held it perpetually, perfectly, without the diminishment that comes from time passing and contrast arriving, and the best moment becoming a memory rather than a present fact. It was the most beautiful and the most devastating thing Sam had ever seen. "They're not suffering," she said. "No," Thorne agreed. Every voice agreed. "But they're not..." She stopped, searched for the word. "They're not surprised by anything. They can't be. There's nothing left to surprise them." Thorne was quiet in the way he had always been quiet when she was arriving at something. He couldn't take her any faster than she was already moving. Then Nebula spoke, not in tones, not in runes or frequencies or living geometry. Here, inside the consciousness of her, she spoke in Sam's own language because there was no longer distance requiring translation. The choice was simple. It was always simple. It was only the living that made choices complicated. Sam could remain, return to the ruined Earth, the toxic sky, the silence of a planet that had already been mostly archived, the last human in a world that had been declared, by the cold logic of cosmic preservation, a corrupted file. She could live in the noise and the damage and the irreversible imperfection of a reality that had no guarantee of continuation. She could be real in all the ways that reality costs something. Or she could step into the light, join the archive, live the best day, live all the best days in the perfect, sustained silence of permanent preservation. No suffering, no loss, no cold moving through fabric and bone without permission, no waking up uncertain whether today would be survivable. But she would not know Thorne. Not the way she knows him now, accumulated, specific, earned across all the hours of running and fear,
and the occasional silence between two beings who had begun to trust each other's presence. Inside the library, she would not carry the history of him. She would not remember the tunnels, or the graveyard of deactivated androids, or the moment she almost pulled the cord and chose instead to let the translation finish. She would be a perfect file, complete, clean, without the particular damage that makes one person different from every other person who has ever lived. Thorne could not follow her in. The archive's human sector had no entry for what he was. He would remain here, librarian, keeper, the consciousness that moved between the shelves of preserved worlds, watching her perfect happiness from the permanent distance of outside. Sam reached into her jacket. The book was still there. It had survived everything: the tower, the tunnels, the graveyard dark, the violet beam pulling the sound from a room at altitude. Its cover was
warped. Several pages near the back had fused together with moisture. The spine had been cracked so many times it no longer fully closed. She opened it to a page chosen by damage rather than intention, and looked at the words. Rivers of the world. Imprecise, incomplete, full of errors that subsequent editions had corrected, and errors that had never been caught, and the specific, unrepeatable error of having been carried by one person through circumstances that no editor had anticipated and no archive had been designed to accommodate. It was, by any standard of preservation, a corrupted file. It was the most real thing she was holding. She understood something then, not for the first time, but for the first time clearly enough to act on without hesitation. The corruption was not the flaw in the life. The corruption was the life. Every mistake, every scar, every moment of not knowing and getting it wrong and trying again from a position of incomplete information, that was not the noise interfering with the signal. That was the signal. The mess and the grief and the very specific joy of being surprised by something you didn't plan for and couldn't have preserved in advance. That was the only version of existence that was actually alive rather than merely saved. Perfection was not the destination. Perfection was the end of the road. She closed the book. "No," she said, quietly, without performance, the way you say the truest things. The white library held its breath, and then Nebula, ancient, patient, built by a dying civilization's most sincere act of love, considered the error standing in her archive, holding a damaged book, and she recognized something she had not been designed to recognize, but had, across the long accumulation of her archiving, learned to observe. Some things could not be preserved without being destroyed in the preservation. Some things only existed in the being lost and continuing anyway. She let them go. The white withdrew. The library folded back into frequency. The frequency folded back into sky. And the sky, violet no longer, the pulse receding, the enormous patience of Nebula moving on toward whatever coordinates her ancient makers had built into her, began slowly, improbably, to clear. The sun rose over the ruined earth. It was not a beautiful sunrise in any postcard sense. The atmosphere was still damaged. The city below was still broken. The world was still almost entirely silent in ways it had not been silent before. There was extraordinary amounts of work to be done, with no guarantee that doing it would be enough, and no one left to do it except two figures standing on a high ridge in the early light, one biological and one not,
both real in every sense that reality requires. Sam looked at the sunrise. Thorne stood beside her. She didn't say anything, neither did he. There had been enough language for now, in enough frequencies. The sun moved across the damaged sky, and the light was imperfect and insufficient, and the most honest thing she had seen in as long as she could remember. She put the book back in her jacket. They had work to do.